I'm JN Musto, who says that every one of these I'll never say a word, and I don't say a word. There are two things I think you need to be aware of. One is the efforts of Senator Brian Schatz. He introduced a piece of federal legislation, along with some other colleagues in the Senate, that would severely impact the for-profit sector of higher education. It came out of a series of problems, which are well documented, that suggest that those for-profit institutions are causing huge, huge debt to various student populations, military in particular, post-military, easily coming out $85,000, $100,000 worth of debt, and absolutely no job prospects. These aren't institutions that are trying to be liberal arts, we're going to teach you to think institutions. These are institutions that are predicated on the notion that if you come to us, you will have a job in the IT gaming industry. All right? Actually, I have a friend of mine who was working for one of these institutions. He was a student counselor, and he took a group of students to an international conference on gaming that occurred in San Diego. They had some famous software programmer give a speech. There were almost 10,000 people listening to this speech. He said the prospects for new software engineers in the field of gaming next year is about 1,000. There will be 1,000 jobs. This is internationally. There were 10,000 people in the room studying to be software gaming. That is what the senator's effort is to restrict them. And what are they using? They're saying not the faculty number, but the institution needs to articulate what the outcome is that a student can expect if they invest $85,000 of money that actually came from the federal government to do this. Part of what's happening with the accrediting agencies is they are caught up in that same wave. And it's flowing back on public sector, classic community colleges, universities, to respond in a similar way. So that's one thing I want you to keep in mind. I absolutely, as a citizen, support the senator's efforts in that regard. I think it borders on fraud what's going on that side. But an unintended consequence may be the promotion of quote-unquote SLOs and things like that. The other issue is locally. I spent a lot of time over a lot of years with John Morton. For those who don't recall, John was the provost of this campus at one point. He's now the vice president for community colleges. And we have talked about SLOs from their very first iteration. I hate to try to formulate John's thoughts, but they are very simple. In fact, this part he said to me very specifically. He said, I could have chosen two approaches with SLOs and the accrediting agencies. One was to fight them and to just say no. The other was to find a way to comply with what they were requesting without fundamentally changing what went on in the community colleges and how the instruction was being taught. The choice I made was to find a way to comply. What I find as a consequence of trying to find that is probably a better evaluation system, not because it's based on quote-unquote SLOs, but because it requires a much more reflective look. So it no longer is just simply a presentation that was made, rather it was looking at what did that presentation, what effect did it actually have on the students in the class. His view is as enlightened an administrative view as I have heard on this story. The whole issue that was raised about the lecturers being evaluated, that came out of the accreditation reports. What John was trying to do in the policy that was passed, and by the way, consulted with us and also amended after those consultations, was to see that the lecturers were actually held to the same standard as the regular full-time continuing faculty. At the same time, not making the lecturers having the requirement on their own in addition to create these SLOs. In other words, that wasn't an additional expectation on these temporary employees hired semester by semester, which is, from my perspective, very reasonable. It would have been very unreasonable for them to have to come in, course by course, and readjust and make their own SLOs. So, that's part of it. I only offer that up as to give you motivations for why things are happening both here locally and our community colleges and nationally as well. I continue, UHPA continues, to resist the impacts of SLOs. In other words, how are they going to be used for promotion, tenure, and reappointment? That's been our thing, the impacts. We bargain over the impacts. So even if they exist, how are they going to be used? It is absolutely unreasonable to try to allow them to get to a point where they are a quantitative measure of the achievement of a certain percentage of every class that you have. i.e., 80% will achieve, within a 90th percentile of the information So I think we have been successful at that thus far. Do I think that the battle will continue to rage? I do, because I also know that John Morton has probably about as much time in this system as I do left, and that's not a lot. And somebody else will follow his place, and follow my place. Anyway, that probably should be